So welcome to this video cast. We're thrilled that you're joining us. I want to just introduce two people that are going to briefly talk about two people who are the interviewees in this video cast. One is Cal Anderson, and Cal is an engineer at SpaceX, and the other person is Joe Assof, and Joe is a teacher could you say more about your position, Joe?
Sure, yeah. So I run the math department over at Health Sciences High and Middle College. I work with Dr. Fisher and Dr. Fry. We have a lot of work and a big focus around literacy, and I've been doing a lot of work with the math department around studying the new standards, the Common Core State standards, as well as the standards for mathematical practice.
Wonderful. And we're thrilled that you're both joining us today. And part of what we're going to do is ask Cal to talk about his position. And then Joe, as I understand it, you'll talk a little bit about the skills and strategies that you work on with your children to help them be prepared for positions like Cal's, right? And
right.
You know Cal already. Could you tell people a little bit about that?
Yeah, so I had the pleasure, thank you again, Cal. I had the pleasure of taking a handful of students to Cal's place of work in Hawthorne over at SpaceX, and Cal gave us a phenomenal kind of behind-the-scenes tour of SpaceX. And when I say behind the scenes, I mean no cameras allowed sort of thing. And it was phenomenal to be able to see not just what Cal did, but how what Cal did fit into every single piece of this enormous operation. It was incredibly impressive. And every single one of our students that went walked away saying, I want to do what he does. I want to do something in that building. I want to be a mechanical engineer. It was an absolutely life-changing experience.
That's fascinating. Now, Cal, would you fill us in a little bit on what Joe and his students got to see when they came to visit you? Tell us about your career and what you do, please.
So I'm a manager at Space Exploration Technologies, also known as SpaceX. SpaceX designs, manufactures, and launches advanced rockets and spaceships. The company was founded in 2002 to revolutionize space technology with the ultimate goal of enabling people to live on alternate planets. My specific role in that is, like I said, I'm a manager and I work over in their tooling fabrication group. So all the jigs, fixtures, lifting, and manipulation equipment that's used to move the rocket and parts of the rocket around the factory and across the country. We do interact with a bunch of those types of things.
Thank you. So for those of us who wonder, well, what would it be like to be in your shoes for a day? Could you just kind of tell us about your daily work and what that looks like and what you do? And remember the technical terms a lot of us won't understand, so feel free to explain that in detail.
Yeah, of course. So I'm somewhat limited on the details that I can say due to the International Trafficking of Arms Regulation. It's a thing called ITAR. And so I'll have to be a little bit less descriptive. And so I'll just explain the ideas of things instead. So I steer manufacturing teams to build the highest reliability parts and assemblies at the lowest cost and highest velocity. That's basically what I do. So it requires, tons of communication with hundreds of people spread across many groups ranging from design, manufacturing units, outside suppliers, purchasing, shipping, receiving, inventory, and many other business units, across states and throughout Hawthorne. We have an opportunity to interact with people that you wouldn't normally have an opportunity to interact with given the very flat management structure that exists over there. So Elon is really big on breaking down the walls that prevent effective and quick communication between people. So one of the things that I didn't have an opportunity to show Joe while he was there, the kids, because it was kind of out of bounds, is our office space. So all of our office spaces have very low partitions between each desk. And the goal is that, like a gopher would pop their head up and communicate with their neighbor, you have an opportunity to do that on a daily basis. And so they explain frequently that you should never be afraid to communicate vertically throughout the business. If you have a need to communicate with Elon, by all means, time for you, kind of thing. So with that being said, I haven't really interacted with Elon very much. I think I've met him a couple of times, shook his hand, but I never really had a need to go to Elon and explain my problems to him. So,
Well, you've kind of gotten into another topic that we're interested in, and that is how words matter in your job. You talked a little about that. Could you add some more?
yeah, words have meaning. So I'll expand on that a little bit. But how frequently do you communicate with somebody else and they misinterpret what you said, and you end up saying, "That's not what I meant. I meant something else." So words have incredible meaning, and if we're not careful, the selection of the wrong word can promote an idea that actually hurts your credibility. And so words have meaning, and those words help build credibility. Now, I've had a tremendous opportunity through my upbringing and my education and some of the jobs that I've had previous to SpaceX and throughout SpaceX to build credibility, but also have enough times where I said, "That's not what I meant. I meant something else." So I'm very selective about the words that I use. And so I would say that words are extremely important. They are paramount, both written and spoken.
Well, could you talk a little bit more about the written words, the reading that you do as a part of your job, the writing that you do as part of your job?
Sure. So a lot of what I read is specification type documents. And a specification is like a canned instructional element. And by calling that specification, people understand quickly a very large idea with minimum verbiage. And so it's like, imagine building a rocket or any complex assembly, hundreds of thousands of parts, tons of different teams of people that all play a different role or responsibility throughout the build. And I need the ability quickly and easily to just reference a specification and know that they know what I'm talking about without having to rewrite the instructions that exist within that specification over and over and over and over. So the cool thing about a specification is that if it's written properly and it conveys the right words and ideas, then I can be certain that what Joe understands is what I also understand. So there's an expectation management there.
Could you?
I'm sorry, Cindy. Would you say that the goal with those specification documents is really for efficiency? Are you looking to be very efficient with the work? So like you said, you can have the maximum amount of information with the minimum amount of reading or time required to gain that information?
Well, it's twofold. So first thing, efficiency, absolutely, right? Second thing is standardization. So, basically, have you ever played the game telephone? I'm sure you must have. One person starts out with a phrase, and that phrase is continually interpreted and then retranslated. And the more and more times that happens, you introduce a level of variability. And there's the highest degree of variability at the end, the most amount of opportunity for confusion. Specification is an opportunity for us to say the exact same thing over and over and over again, the same said it the first time. And so there's only the level of confusion about the specification that we have to worry about. And if you use the right words, then you reduce confusion.
I see. So that standardization really does feed back to that first component of efficiency because everyone's speaking the same language essentially.
Absolutely. And then you have another opportunity to do training on specific or parts of that specification.
That kind of feeds into another follow-up question I had. One thing that really struck me about the tour that you gave us was how you didn't just know your job, but you fully understood your role. At least you conveyed the fact that you understood your role in the greater scheme of things, and that you were very clear about how what you did directly or even indirectly impacted all the various other departments that we got the privilege of touring. And I'm wondering how much of that was how much of that is what you came to the table with, and how much of it is encouraged or built in by or trained even at SpaceX? How much of that is something that they ask for so that everybody kind of knows what's going on?
Well, I think that there's a certain level of understanding that's required. Effective communication is paramount throughout SpaceX and any manufacturing business, really. SpaceX is unique in that they provide a, like I said, a very flat management structure. So they also are not typical aerospace, where there's not a whole lot of layers of, there's not a whole bunch of managers between myself and Elon. So if there's questions that I have about my part of the business and how it affects other parts of the business, I'm encouraged to communicate with those people. It's really the only way that you have to understand the big picture. We're moving so fast and with so many parts. We don't communicate. There's no program. There is no massive, scheduling template or things like that keep everybody running in the same direction all the time. So a lot of the times we end up having to get down on the ground and communicate with the people that we're feeding.
So the work itself facilitates that level of kind of comprehension of everything that's going on around you?
Absolutely. Plus, we all have a vested interest in making sure that the rocket flies successfully. So if I need to go down and pick up a wrench or move a part or, get in my truck and, help haul it, across the campus or whatever, we're encouraged to be involved as we possibly can and complete our job at the same time. And so by doing that, I've picked up a lot of experiences that wouldn't normally be available in other companies, because there's the guy that tapes the box, and then there's a guy that lifts it onto the table, and then there's a guy that takes it from the table to the truck, and the guy that opens the truck door, and then the guy that loads the truck. And so there's so many different layers there. And so we work continuously to try and break down those walls and empower people to be able to play their part.
Sure.
So, Cal, could you talk a little bit about, if you were to interview a candidate for a position with your company, what demands for reading and writing, possibly discussion and speaking, would you expect of a candidate?
So it kind of also plays into the various languages that are used, right? So one language media is specifications. Another language media is what we call print or architectural print. Is kind of like the best likeness. So when you build a home and you say, I want the house to be this big, the print is really the only way to make sure that what the builder creates and what I wanted are the same thing, right? So it's imperative that the candidates understand how to speak both languages, right? So a print is usually a visual interpretation of a physical part that I want. And there's certain dimensions that are on there. I want this thing to be 4 by 8. Now, 4 by 8 is not enough, right? I need to know what are the units. So 4 feet by 8 feet. Okay, well, that gives me a little bit of information, but not enough. So I'm looking for the individual that has the ability to comprehend how to translate what I want into a visual representation on a print that can be constructed quickly, efficiently, and at the lowest cost. So if they can speak that language, and then they can also speak the language that's required to say to the builder, I need you to use this saw while also paying attention to all the safety requirements to run that saw. And I need you to cut this piece of lumber specifically at this angle and this dimension. They're speaking a language, right? They're basically writing a mini specification, and we call that planning. And so many manufacturing environments do the same thing. It's a translation of instructions and ideas to the written word. extremely important, very difficult to find. And so to answer your question, what would I look for within an interviewee candidate is I basically have a conversation with that individual. I listen intently to the answers that they give to my questions. I formulate those questions beforehand and spend a lot of time thinking about them with a known set of responses that I would accept and ones that I would not accept. And that way, when I interview individuals, they all have the same shot at that job, right? So some interviewees will answer correctly, and some will not, and that's the way that I kind of weed them out. But basically, I'm looking to have an intelligent conversation with an individual about the questions that I have to ask them. So one of the very first thing is, do you understand my question? And I use language that is particular to the job. It is considered jargon in most cases, right? So it may be above certain people's heads. But it's important that the individual interviewing for that position, it doesn't go over their head in particular. Given their previous experience or their education, I would expect that they would understand completely what it is that I'm trying to explain to them or ask them. And then frequently I will ask them to explain what I just told them. And that gives me the ability to understand whether or not they comprehend the idea that I'm selling to them, whether or not they recognize that there's a problem with my statement, and give them an opportunity to correct it or ask questions afterwards. Depending upon their correction or the questions that they ask me tells me if they're engaged. Also, do they feel comfortable asking questions? And then if they just have a blank stare on their face, then I know they're probably not the right candidate.
So it sounds like you make your interview interactive.
Yes, I role play. That's kind of the most unique thing. I've never seen a role play in another interview that I've been in personally. So I will pick a topic. I'll explain the environment that they're in, and then I will also explain their role to play. And then we have a conversation, and how that conversation goes is very important because it tells me what's important to them. What are they willing to bend on? What are they willing to break on? What do they not understand about that position? What questions they ask beforehand before we even start the role play. So those are kind of unique. It's very infrequent to see written exam SpaceX. It's just not very common. Every once in a while, we'll see a practical type exam where, for instance, measure this part. Tell me what the dimensions of this thing are. There's a bunch of tools on the table required to perform inspection. Did they select the correct one? Did they follow my instructions to select the one I had hoped that they would select? Things like that.
So Cal, correct me if I'm wrong, but it sounds like all of the assessment essentially that you do in the interview process is application-based, and it's really situational as opposed to just figuring out what they know and they don't know. It's really based on a specific role-playing situation.
Well, role-playing is only a small part of it. So we'll ask the traditional, there are traditional questions that are asked by interviewers. And so it's basically to get a feel for, we only have a certain amount of time during an interview. And so I understand that interviewee through and through in the short amount of time that I have with them. And we do a lot of interviews. We're consistently looking for the best talent, throughout the world. And so it's incredibly important that we make the best of the time that we have. The role playing is a tool, but it's only a part of the puzzle.
So let me ask you a very much oversimplified follow-up question. Which would you value more, a person's wealth of knowledge or ability to apply that knowledge?
Excellent question. We ask that all the time, right? So first, you have to make the assumption that we are only going to make the decision to interview certain candidates. So there's a vetting process that exists beforehand. So what you're receiving are the people that already know how to do the math. They understand the core concepts. What I'm interested in trying to find out is do they understand the core concepts well enough to understand where they're broken? Where can they be exploited? You know, I can't think of a good example off the top of my head, but the person that looks at the world that they're living within and recognizes that it could all be fixed if they just closed the door, something simple, it's all inside, So some engineers will spend a bunch of time designing and building an expensive heating unit when it's just as simple as closing the door.
Yeah.
So we're looking for practical engineers that are out there. That the tagline is "Bleed SpaceX Blue," so that they are on fire about coming to work every day because of the mission. Because of what we are trying to accomplish is something bigger than you find in any other part of the aerospace industry. And that's one of the big reasons why we don't consider ourselves to be aerospace. I hope I answered your question.
Oh, absolutely. And that was absolutely clear during the tour. It was, you weren't the only enthusiastic employee tour guide. I noticed that everybody up and down that corridor was just equally thrilled about the work that they were a part of.
It's hard not to be excited about flying rockets in space.
Right.
Pretty sweet.
I also have a follow-up question, Cal. You said you want to hire the absolute best talent.
We do.
You have somebody standing in front of you. What are the characteristics of the person who's the most talented?
I'm trying to assess their raw material, right? So who are they as a person? Are they energetic? Are they the kind of person that understands the job's not done till the job's done? If they have the raw materials, then we move from there. We understand, do they have the correct thinking, patterns? Do they problem solve correctly? Are they afraid to communicate with other people? That's a big thing, right? So it's very easy to get into a position where you spend a bunch of time trying to solve a problem by yourself when you could have asked for assistance, or just shot some ideas against somebody else, and gotten to the end goal a lot more quickly. It's not really like a catch-all super question that we can ask an employee. It's a total assessment of that person's attitude, their dedication to the mission. One of the big things I think is interesting is, hey, I noticed that you applied for this position. So excited to have you here. Thanks for taking the time out of your day to come see us. Could you tell me a little bit about SpaceX? Oh, you're a rocket company. That's super. Yeah, we are a rocket company. We're doing some really cool stuff. Could you tell me about some of those things? Well, no, not really. What was the last thing that we did at SpaceX that's notable? I'll have to get back to you on that one. How many launches have we had? I don't know. What was the last YouTube video that you watched on SpaceX? When they can't answer that stuff, they're not fired up about SpaceX in a way that we need them to be. We're expecting people that are so excited to come in and interview that they do all the research they possibly can, so they come in with questions. When I take a potential candidate down the main aisle of our factory, and they're asking me questions about the engines that they recognize, I know that person is engaged, that person is self-motivated, and that person is probably going to have the right raw materials. If they have that, then I move on to the next questions, which are, do you have the ability to learn the things that I need to teach you? Because there is no such thing as a SpaceX degree. You don't go to college to get a degree to work at SpaceX. The degree tells us that you have the ability to learn the things that we need to teach you. And so, as long as you have that, you're fine.
Fascinating.
If we could, Cal, I'd like to ask another, since we're on the topic of interviews and what you use on a daily basis at SpaceX, I'd like to kind of give you a 4-part question with 4 separate qualities. And maybe if you could value them on a scale of 1 to 10 for either somebody who's interviewing for a position or somebody who's just utilizing these qualities on a daily basis. So maybe on a scale of 1 to 10, and then I'm going to ask you to kind of maybe do so a little bit conservatively so that we can compare and try to see if there's some that you value more than others.
Okay.
Okay, so the first one would be attention to detail or precision.
Either or, is that what you're asking?
Yeah, attention to detail or attention to precision. Well, one and the same. So attention to precision, we'll call it.
Well, the individual that is paying attention to the details is the individual that's not going to have a lot of rework or repairs, right? So it's not the I meant something different employee.
Right.
So it's extremely important that all candidates have attention to detail, because having to redo work is just waste. And mostly it affects our lead time, which is incredibly valuable.
And so for the sake of comparing these after, where would you put attention to precision on a scale of 1 to 10?
Probably an 8.
Very good. Thank you. How about
just for calibration efforts, I rarely rate anything a 10. So
I hear you. Well, and that's good, because we're going to have some that you might want to rate ahead of that. How about as a quality, someone's ability to construct viable arguments and critique the reasoning of others?
I do that all day long, every day, selling an idea, an idea that a lot of people don't always appreciate or agree with.
Right.
And so the ability of an employee to comprehend an argument well enough to provide reasonable and intelligent feedback is incredibly important. I rate that at least at an 8. Because really, we're selling ideas.
Yeah.
Right? And if the person, the customer doesn't want to buy the idea that I'm trying to sell them, I'm in a hard place.
Yeah.
And a lot of times we can be motivated to force them to see it our way, which is not really effective, because the first opportunity that they have to see it their own way or a different way, they will. Mm-hmm. But I'm looking for somebody that's going to be able to tell me, hey, you know what, that idea doesn't really make a whole lot of sense because of this, this, and this. Have you thought of that? You know what, Joe, those are really great points. Let me take those into account, and then perhaps we can come up with an alternate solution, achieve all this as well.
Very good. How about making sense of problems and persevering in solving them?
Perseverance is paramount. Are you going to give me one that's like a low priority, or perseverance is tells me that I have the ability to give an employee a task, and I know that I can trust that it's going to be accomplished. I don't have to micromanage that employee because I know that the feedback that the job is complete means that they didn't leave anything. Plus, I don't have to go bail them out every 5 minutes. I know that they're gonna learn more from the journey than somebody that just continuously comes back to me and asks me to feed them the answer.
And so, I'm sorry, it might have cut out when you rated it. Where would you put making sense of problems and persevering in solving them on a scale of 1 to 10?
I'd probably give that an 8 as well.
And then the fourth and final is based on what you were talking about with the standardization process and the documents, your specification documents, reasoning abstractly and quantitatively.
That's a hard one. That to me is like gravy. These are the kind of people that have the ability to say, quick, how many paper clips in that box? And they do math off, back of the envelope type calculation. They have the ability to provide a reasonable response to my question quickly. I see that as being valuable, but if the person has the ability to do that in an acceptable period of time, not the fastest, I would not consider that to be my highest priority. I'm just interested that they get to the end result in a reasonable amount of time. Really fast too.
Joe, it sounds like you were asking Cal really important questions. Could you give us some background about the questions you were just asking Cal?
Yeah, so actually what I've been asking for those qualities are 4 out of the 8 standards for mathematical practice. they're essentially thinking standards, process standards, as opposed to actual content standards. So the idea in the mathematics education right now is that we should be teaching the practices through the content, as opposed to just teaching content as separate chunks of learning. The content is really just an avenue through which you can teach the thinking. And so that's why I was curious, knowing that this is essentially a STEM field in which you're working. I was curious to where you would value each of these and how much you find yourself kind of drawing upon them in your day-to-day and others around you drawing upon them. And it's awesome to hear that more than halfway through, you asked if we were going to talk about any that weren't valuable. This is very validating for the standards, at least, that we're our minds are in the right place.
Yeah, absolutely. I couldn't possibly agree more. I think it's more important to understand, the concept of the problem and how you might go about solving it. The people in school, at least when I was in university, right? The people that were the most successful in university were the ones that understood from a foundational level why were we trying to solve this problem? Why was it valuable? What are the steps to try and solve that type of problem? Not necessarily procedurally, like addition, take this number, add it to this number, that's the summation, right? Mm-hmm. So it's basically, what is the idea of summing two numbers? Like, what does that mean? How can I remember the process over and over and over again? Because procedures can be forgotten. If you understand where to go for that procedure and you understand foundationally why you're trying to solve that problem, you're more likely to remember it, or at least remember where you need to go to get the procedure.
Sure. That's how to reconstruct it when you need it.
Exactly. Mm-hmm. If you have an incredible memory, that's great, but it's, or the ability to perform quick mathematics is also awesome, and you'll be more powerful, but it's extremely important to be able to be the stranded person on the island that can basically resurrect how to solve a problem that they haven't seen in 5 years. For instance, I haven't done any kind of calculus in the past 2 years, probably. For fun, every once in a while, I'll solve a problem using it, I guess, just because it's faster. I want to prove that I have the ability to do it. So I'm able to comprehend the concept of, say, a derivative, because I understand what it really represents.
Sure.
Not just a procedure.
Right.
It's an idea.
Joe, I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about what you do to prepare students with the kinds of language and thinking demands that you and Cal have been talking about. Could you kind of share some of that with us?
Well, sure. So, yeah, a lot of it is, again, trying to teach these standards for mathematical practice. We do a lot of work where at the beginning of a new content domain or at the beginning of a new unit, rather than starting with, okay, step one at the very beginning, this is what we do, we start with a problem. And we start with, okay, so here's something that we don't know how to do. And that's the point. Let's figure out what we can do. Let's figure out how much access we do have to that, to this problem. And then once we find a need, once we build the need for more mathematics, let's then start to learn how to do these mathematics, but now with purpose. So trying to give them some authentic discovery or constructivist opportunities seems pretty beneficial in building this type of thinking as opposed to just procedural fluency. So we do a lot of work around that.
I wish I had that. The amount of work that I had to put in to like course method, remember equations and concepts that didn't have any real life application. Went in one ear and out the other. Only years later did I comprehend that it was valuable and would have made me a more powerful engineer to have remembered that concept.
Yeah. So actually just kind of a little funny side question on that, Cal. I'd like to know, when is the last time that you've rationalized a denominator?
I actually do that pretty frequently.
Do you? Okay, good.
Yeah, I do that pretty frequently. It's kind of interesting. Fractional units are still somewhat utilized for just rough cutting material. Mm-hmm. So a lot of the machine shops in the area and across the states, pretty much, they work in English fractional units. So it's not too uncommon to be like trying to do what they call a cut list, where I have a bunch of different parts made out of a piece of tube. How much tube do I need? If the tube comes in 12-foot lengths, how many sticks do I need? How many sticks? So that's fairly common, actually.
That's surprising and great to hear, because that's a big debate in math ed right now. Should we continue to teach students how to rationalize a denominator, make sure that there aren't any radicals or negatives or what have you in the denominator of a fraction? And the logic has always been, you teach this for the sake of slide rules, which we don't use anymore. But it's interesting to find out that you're still very much using this in the field.
Well, calculator means a lot more to you when you had to do a slide rule, right? So you comprehend the value that's been given to you. There's no comprehension for that value today, because jump to the end solution. They see the calculator, and the calculators these days are better than they've ever been.
Right.
And I grew up in a world where slide rules were not around, and calculators were. But there was still a large percentage of the population that had used slide rules. And so it's we don't get to use a calculator until you understand this concept. And I appreciate the fact that they forced us to go through it, because it starts to make sense. Why does a calculator work the way that it does? Try and use a Hewlett-Packard reverse Polish calculator, and you're like, what is going on here? This doesn't make any sense. But it makes perfect sense when you're trying to manually solve that problem.
Right.
In fact, it makes more sense than a regular calculator that you use today.
Sure. And so then to build on that a little more, the question that you asked me, Cindy, something else that we do is we're always having our students in collaborative groups. So the mathematical practice that I called out to Cal there, the construction of viable arguments and critiquing the reasoning of others, we have a lot of tasks where students are graded as a group. And it's known that each paper is not graded individually. A piece of each paper, or whatever medium we use to represent the task, is graded. So they need to get on the same page. And that's the point. That's where the learning occurs. So if we have a different understanding of what we should be putting for part one, that's good, because that means that we have the opportunity to learn, because either one or both of us are incorrect. And we try to push to our students that rather than trying to be right, we should be in the right, or try to be in the right, because that shows mobility.